Dretsen the absence. The Vox grill crackles once, twice, then falls silent. In that silence, 10,000 years of history unravel before they can even begin. The Emperor of mankind does not ascend to the golden throne. He does not become the psychic beacon that guides humanity through the warp's madness. He simply ceases, and in that cessation, the galaxy tears itself apart with a violence that makes the Horus heresy look like a rehearsal for the real apocalypse. This is not the Imperium you know. This is the darkness that waits when the light never ignites, when the Astronomicon never blazes forth, when humanity faces the long night without even the false hope of a corpse god watching over them. The palace walls still smoke when the realization spreads like contamination through the custodian guard. Their gene-wrought bodies stand motionless in the sanctum where the golden throne squats like a malignant growth of archaeotech and desperation, but the device remains empty. Malkador the Sigillite's psychic scream echoes through the webway breach for 3 days before his body finally accepts death, having spent everything to seal a wound that will not stay sealed without the Emperor's infinite will pressing against it. The demons that pour through the rift in those 72 hours claim 17,000 souls before Rogel Dorn himself leads a suicide charge into the tear, dragging 3 full companies of Imperial fists into immaterial hell just to buy enough time to collapse the corridor entirely. They seal it with stone and ceramite and the corpses of heroes, but everyone in that chamber knows the truth. Without the throne's occupant, the webway gate beneath the palace is a bleeding wound that will fester forever. Dorn emerges from that slaughter with his armor cracked and weeping fluids that might be blood or might be something worse. His eyes carry the haunted look of a man who has seen the galaxy's future and found it wanting. He says nothing for 6 hours, standing in the throne room while tech priests and mechanicum adepts swarm over the golden throne's mechanisms, desperately trying to comprehend what their instruments are telling them. The device is functional, perfectly calibrated. It waits for an occupant that will never come, and in that waiting, it becomes the most expensive tomb marker in human history. Jagatai Khan arrives within the day, his fleet translating in-system with a violence that suggests desperate haste. He takes one look at the empty throne, at Dorn's 1,000-yard stare, and his expression hardens into something that might be resignation or might be rage. He speaks the words everyone is thinking, but no one wants to voice. Where is he? The question spreads through the palace like poison through a water supply. Where is the Emperor? Did he die aboard the Vengeful Spirit during his confrontation with Horus? Did the War Master's final blow strike true despite the official narratives? Or did something worse happen? Did he simply abandon humanity at the moment of its greatest need? His grand experiment deemed a failure not worth salvaging? The custodians refuse to answer. Perhaps they do not know. Perhaps knowing would break them worse than ignorance. They maintain their vigil over an empty throne while the galaxy begins its slide into an abyss deeper than any they have yet imagined. Robota Guilliman receives the news 3 months later, transmitted through fragmentary astropathic communication that arrives more as emotional impression than coherent message. He is in the Ultramar sector, consolidating his 500 worlds when the choir on Macragge begins screaming in unison. 17 astropaths die conveying the information, their minds unable to process the psychic vacuum where the Emperor's presence should be. Gilliman's response is immediate and methodical, because that is what he does. He plans, he organizes, he builds systems to weather any storm. He draws up the Codex Astartes in 6 weeks of sleepless fury, a document meant to prevent any single Primarch from wielding the power their father once held. He begins fragmenting the legions before anyone can stop him, breaking apart the great war machines of the Crusade into smaller, more manageable chapters. His brothers call it paranoia. He calls it necessity. Without the Emperor's unifying will, the legions are fusion bombs waiting for someone to pull the trigger. But Guilliman is one man trying to hold back a tidal wave with organizational charts and strategic doctrine. Across the galaxy, other Primarchs respond to the absence in ways that reflect their fundamental natures, and in those responses, the seeds of 10,000 different futures begin to germinate. Leman Russ takes the Space Wolves and vanishes into the Eye of Terror, chasing the demon shade of Magnus the Red with a single-mindedness that borders on madness. He never returns. 3 centuries later, scattered reports speak of a wild-eyed giant leading packs of wolfen through the immaterium, hunting chaos spawn with a ferocity that terrifies even the entities native to that realm. Whether he still remembers his name or his purpose becomes a matter of theological debate among the wolves who remain behind. Lion L. Johnson retreats to Caliban and finds his homeworld in open rebellion, Luther and half the Legion, having apparently spent the heresy, plotting their own brand of insurrection. The civil war that erupts makes Istvan look like a skirmish. Caliban breaks apart under the fury of the Dark Angel's internecine slaughter, the planet literally tearing itself into asteroids while warp storms claw at reality around the dying world. The Lion survives, but he is changed. More paranoid, more secretive, more convinced that betrayal lurks in every shadow. He leads his remaining legion into the darkness of the Eastern Fringe, establishing a network of fortress monasteries that answer to no one but him. The Dark Angels become a state within a state, prosecuting their own wars according to their own logic, while the rest of humanity struggles just to survive. Vulcan tries to hold things together through sheer force of compassion and will. He establishes relief efforts across 100 embattled worlds, his salamanders becoming as known for their humanitarian work as their skill in battle. But compassion without power is just prolonged suffering, and Vulcan learns this lesson in the hardest way possible when a combined Orc, Wa, and Chaos incursion hits the Nocturne system. He spends 3 decades fighting a 2-front war that grinds his legion down to a quarter of its original strength. The man who emerges from that crucible is harder, more pragmatic, less willing to trust in the fundamental goodness of humanity. He still tries to save people, but now he understands that sometimes salvation looks like a mercy killing. Corvus Corax takes his Raven Guard into the shadows and begins a campaign of systematic assassination that will span centuries. If the Imperium cannot be held together through unity, perhaps it can be maintained through terror. Eliminate the right targets, remove the right warlords, and maybe the fragmenting human territories will be too afraid of each other to engage in total war. It is a grim calculus, and it costs Corax something essential. His sons watch their Primarch become more wraith than man, more idea than individual. When he finally vanishes into the warp 500 years later, chasing Lorgar into the Eye of Terror, some of the Raven Guard claim it is a mercy. The Corax who remained was barely recognizable as the liberation fighter who once freed slaves on Deliverance. Rogel Dorn becomes the Praetorian of nothing. He maintains his vigil over the Imperial Palace, over Terra, over the empty throne that mocks them all with its vacancy. The Imperial fists dig in, fortifying the Sol system until it becomes an impregnable fortress, but fortresses only work when there is something beyond the walls worth protecting. Dorn watches the Imperium fragment, watches his brothers scatter to their own corners of the galaxy, and understands that he is guarding a corpse. Not the Emperor's corpse. There is no body to honor, no remains to inter, but the corpse of the dream they all shared. When he finally leaves Terra centuries later to die aboard a Chaos battle barge in what may be a suicide mission, his last words are reported as, "There is nothing left to defend." The Imperial fists inherit his fatalism like a genetic defect. Ferrus Manus is already dead, his head claimed by Fulgrim on Istvan Vave, but his legion survives, and they become perhaps the most dangerous force in this new galaxy. The Iron Hands, having already lost their Primarch, react to the Emperor's absence not with grief, but with cold determination. They begin a process of systematic augmentation, replacing flesh with machine at a rate that alarms even the Mechanicum. They reason that if the Emperor, the pinnacle of human evolution, could fail, then humanity itself is the flaw. The solution is obvious: become something other than human. Within 3 centuries, the Iron Hands are barely recognizable as Astartes, their bodies more machine than gene-forged tissue. They wage war with a mechanical efficiency that achieves victory, but sickens anyone who witnesses it. Worlds burn, not because the Iron Hands hate their enemies, but because the tactical calculations dictate purgation as the most resource-efficient solution. Jagatai Khan reads the winds of this new age and makes a choice that will define the White Scars for millennia. He cannot hold the Imperium together, no one can, but he can preserve the ideals of the Great Crusade in miniature. He leads his legion into the galactic west, into regions where the Astronomican's light never reached even when it burned, and he begins building a new kind of empire. Not the authoritarian monolith his father envisioned, but something more fluid, more adaptive. The White Scars become rangers and explorers, holding together a loose confederation of human worlds through mutual defense pacts and cultural exchange rather than enforced compliance. It works, after a fashion, but it is a small victory in a galaxy drowning in defeat. The Khan knows this. He rides the storm because the alternative is standing still, and standing still means death. Sanguinius does not survive this timeline. The battle aboard the Vengeful Spirit claims both Horus and the Angel, and without the Emperor to anchor humanity's psychic gestalt, the death of Sanguinius sends a shockwave through the warp that fundamentally alters the Blood Angel's legion. The Black Rage and Red Thirst manifest within weeks, not centuries, and they hit with a virulence that cannot be contained. Half the legion succumbs within the first year, tearing each other apart in blood-mad frenzies or succumbing to the vampiric hunger that turns them into monsters wearing crimson armor. The survivors fragment into small nomadic fleets, staying in motion because stopping means facing what they have become. They develop rituals and practices meant to manage their condition, but it is a losing battle. Within 5 centuries, the Blood Angels are more myth than reality. Stories told about crimson-armored monsters that appear during desperate battles, fight with terrifying skill, and then vanish before anyone can determine if they were salvation or damnation. The absence of the Emperor creates a psychic vacuum, and nature, even supernatural nature, abhors a vacuum. Without the Astronomican, warp travel becomes exponentially more dangerous. Navigators can still see the currents and eddies of the Immaterium, can still guide ships through its madness, but they lack the central reference point that made long-distance travel feasible. A journey that would have taken weeks in the Imperium's heyday now takes months or years. Some ships translate into real space decades after they departed, their crews ancient or dead or driven mad by prolonged warp exposure. Others never arrive at all, lost to the hungry entities that swim through the sea of souls. The human territories begin to fragment not by choice but by enforced isolation, each system or cluster of systems cut off from its neighbors by the sheer impossibility of maintaining regular contact. The Mechanicum responds to this new reality with religious fervor and scientific pragmatism in equal measure. On Mars, the Fabricator General convenes a conclave that lasts 3 years, during which the tech priests debate the theological implications of their god's disappearance. Some factions argue that the Omnissiah has transcended physical form entirely, that his absence is actually a test of faith. Others contend that the entity they worshipped was never divine to begin with, merely an extremely advanced human who finally met his mortality. The debate becomes violent, then turns into outright war, and Mars burns with a ferocity that rivals the civil war on Caliban. When the fighting finally ends, the Mechanicum is fractured into dozens of competing Forge worlds, each pursuing its own interpretation of the quest for knowledge. Some maintain something approximating orthodox cult Mechanicus doctrine. Others descend into techno-heresies that would have been unthinkable under the Emperor's rule. A few even begin experimenting with Xenos technology, reasoning that if humanity's divine leader is gone, perhaps salvation lies in the innovations of other species. The Administratum tries to maintain control through bureaucratic inertia and institutional authority, but it is a doomed effort. The machinery of imperial governance was designed to operate with the Emperor as its keystone, the central authority from which all other power derived. Remove that keystone and the entire arch collapses. Terra remains the nominal capital of human space, but it is a capital in name only. The High Lords of Terra issue edicts and proclamations that are ignored by worlds that lack the astropathic capability to even receive them. Regional governors declare themselves kings, lords, or emperors, carving out petty domains from the ruins of sector command structures. The Adeptus Arbits attempts to enforce compliance, but they are hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned by the successor states that bloom like fungal growths across the galaxy's rotting corpse. The ecclesiarchy never forms, because the imperial cult never develops the theological foundation it requires. Without the emperor's apotheosis into a corpse god, without his millennium-spanning vigil from the golden throne, the religion that would have unified humanity through faith has no martyr to worship. Small cults develop around individual primarchs or legendary space marines, but they remain localized phenomena, unable to achieve the galactic reach of the Church of the God Emperor. This might seem like a blessing. No wars of faith, no fraternis Templar pogroms, no age of apostasy, but it removes one of the few forces capable of maintaining cultural cohesion across impossible distances. The human territories drift apart not just physically, but ideologically, each developing its own customs, beliefs, and social structures in isolation from its neighbors. The Xenos races of the galaxy react to humanity's fragmentation with responses ranging from opportunistic aggression to cautious observation. The Orcs, ever pragmatic in their violent simplicity, launch a series of wahs that hit the fragmenting human territories like hammer blows. Without coordinated defense fleets or unified command structures, human worlds fall one after another to greenskin invasions. The Orcs do not distinguish between the old Imperium and the new disorder. They just see fights, and fights are always good. Entire sectors go dark as Orc empires establish themselves on former Imperial worlds, the surviving human populations either enslaved or integrated into the Orc ecosystem as menial labor. On some worlds, humans begin worshipping Orc gods, reasoning that if Gork and Mork can deliver victory, while the Emperor cannot, perhaps humanity backed the wrong deities. The Eldar watch humanity's collapse with emotions that span from satisfaction to concern. The craft worlds, those survivors of the fall, see in humanity's fragmentation an echo of their own apocalypse. Some seers argue for intervention, for guiding the younger race away from the mistakes that birthed Slaanesh. Others counsel isolation, claiming that humanity's fate is written in the skein of possibility and cannot be altered. The debate becomes moot when several craft worlds attempting humanitarian missions to human worlds find themselves attacked by paranoid defense forces who see any Xenos contact as potential corruption. The Eldar withdraw, retreating into their pocket dimensions and artificial habitats, emerging only to pursue their own inscrutable agenda. If humanity wishes to destroy itself, they reason, why should the Eldar risk their already endangered population trying to prevent it? The Tau, still a young race confined to a corner of the eastern fringe, expand into the power vacuum with a speed that surprises even them. Their philosophy of the greater good finds fertile ground among human worlds that have been abandoned by their former government and left to face Xenos threats alone. Entire systems defect to the Tau Empire, their populations seeing in the blue-skinned Xenos a stability and purpose that vanished with the Emperor. The Tau accept these human converts with cautious enthusiasm, incorporating them into their caste system and teaching them the principle of collective prosperity over individual glory. It is cultural imperialism dressed in philosophical language, but to humans who have lived through decades of warp storms and orc raids, it looks like salvation. The Tau Empire grows fat on human industry and manpower, becoming a regional power that will, in time, pose a legitimate threat to what remains of human space. The Necrons stir in their tomb worlds, their automated systems registering the psychic disruption that ripples through the galaxy following the Emperor's absence. The Silent King, still traveling in the intergalactic void on his mission of penance and exploration, does not yet know what has happened. When he eventually returns and learns that humanity's psychic master has fallen, his reaction is complex. Relief that a potential threat to the Necron awakening has been neutralized, but also concern that the younger races now lack any effective coordination against the true enemies that lurk in the darkness between stars. He will eventually realize that humanity's fragmentation makes the galaxy more dangerous, not less, because chaos thrives in disorder, and the Necrons have their own reasons to fear chaos ascendant. The forces of chaos, those entities and empowered mortals who serve the ruinous powers, react to the Emperor's absence with triumphalist glee that quickly curdles into frustration. They expected humanity to fall immediately, to descend into civil war and demonic possession en masse. Instead, the species proves irritatingly resilient. Without the Imperium's centralized oppression, without the enforced ignorance of the Imperial truth, many human worlds actually become less vulnerable to chaos corruption. When people understand that demons are real and can be fought with proper preparation, when they are not told that their emotions and beliefs are irrelevant in the face of secular materialism, they develop folk traditions and practical measures that effectively ward against immaterial predation. The Chaos Gods still feast on human emotion and suffering. There is no shortage of either commodity in this dark age, but they find themselves unable to achieve the total dominance they anticipated. Humanity becomes a persistent, irritating food source rather than a conquered territory, and that frustrates the Dark Gods more than open opposition ever could. 3 centuries pass. The fragmentation is complete. What was once the Imperium of Man is now 10,000 successor states, some comprising single fortress worlds, others controlling entire subsectors. Trade exists, but it is dangerous and expensive, conducted by rogue trader dynasties who are more pirates than merchants. The Space Marine legions, or what remains of them, have fully split into chapters and warbands, some maintaining the ideals of the Great Crusade, others descending into mercenary service or outright tyranny. The Adeptus Astartes no longer exist as a unified institution. They are atomized, individualized, each chapter developing its own culture and purpose in isolation from its brothers. On a world called Krieg, a civil war erupts that will define the planet's future for millennia. The details of the conflict are lost to time and atomic fire, but the result is a world where death cult aesthetics merge with brutal military efficiency. The Kriegers develop a culture that views life as currency to be spent in service to a dead god they barely remember, and their armies export death across their local sector with a thoroughness that would be admirable if it were not so horrifying. They are not unique. Hundreds of worlds develop their own extreme adaptations to the long night, each finding its own answer to the question of how to survive when the stars themselves want you dead. Cadia develops into a fortress world par excellence, its population living in a permanent state of siege against the eye of terror that glares down at them from the sky. Without the Emperor's guidance or the Imperium's support, Cadia should have fallen within a century. Instead, the Cadians develop a military culture so efficient, so grimly determined, that they hold the line through sheer bloody-minded refusal to die. Chaos warbands throw themselves against Cadia's defenses in wave after wave, and each time the Cadians throw them back. The planet becomes a legend, a story told across scattered human worlds about the fortress that will not fall. When Cadian regiments finally begin spreading across the galaxy as mercenaries and military advisors, they bring with them a military doctrine forged in literally constant warfare. The phrase Cadia stands becomes a rallying cry, not for an imperium that no longer exists, but for the idea that humanity can endure any horror if it refuses to surrender. Armageddon becomes a battleground between human and orc forces in a conflict so prolonged that both sides begin to blur together. The human defenders learn orc tactics out of necessity, adopting brutal, straightforward military doctrines that prioritize overwhelming firepower over tactical sophistication. The orcs, in turn, face opponents who actually understand how they think, who can anticipate WOG patterns and counter them effectively. The result is a grinding, multi-generational war that neither side can win, but neither side will abandon. Armageddon's hive cities become forges of constant violence, producing warriors on both sides who know nothing but battle. Some human observers, watching from afar, begin to wonder if there is any meaningful difference between an orc and an Armageddon veteran. Both live to fight. Both define themselves through violence. The distinction becomes philosophical rather than practical. The silent sisterhood, those null maidens who once served directly under the Emperor's command, scatter across the galaxy in small convent ships. They become wandering exorcists and demon hunters, appearing on besieged worlds to combat warp incursions before vanishing back into the void. Their numbers dwindle with each engagement because without the infrastructure to recruit and train new sisters, each death is permanent loss. They know they are a dying order, that within a few centuries they will be extinct, but they persist because someone must stand against the darkness, and they are uniquely equipped to do so. The Sisters of Silence become ghosts, stories told about black-armored women who can kill demons with their mere presence. Some worlds worship them as saints, others fear them as witches. The sisters themselves remain silent on the matter, as they always have, letting their actions speak for them. On ancient Terra, the imperial palace becomes a museum of failure. The custodian guard maintains their vigil, but their numbers decrease with each century as attrition takes its toll, and no new golden warriors are created to replace the fallen. The genetic techniques died with the Emperor, the knowledge lost or deliberately destroyed to prevent its misuse. The 10,000 become 9,000, become 8,000. They patrol empty halls where once they guarded the master of mankind, their armor no longer brilliant gold, but tarnished by time and grief. Pilgrims still come to Terra, seeking wisdom or hope or just confirmation that their species once mattered on a galactic scale. The custodians allow them into the throne room in small groups, let them see the empty seat of power, and then escort them back to their ships. No words are spoken during these vigils. There are no words adequate to the occasion. In the Eastern Fringe, a region previously considered the edge of imperial expansion, human colonies develop in isolation from the catastrophe consuming the core territories. These worlds remember the Imperium as legend, as stories told by their founding generation about a golden age when humanity ruled the stars. Each generation removes the tales further from reality until the Imperium becomes mythology, a fantasy about godlike warriors and an immortal emperor who never actually existed. These colonies develop according to local conditions and available resources, some achieving industrial civilization, others regressing to feudalism or even pre-technological barbarism. They are humanity's backup plan, unintentional and uncoordinated, but potentially the species' salvation. If the core territories burn themselves out in endless warfare, perhaps these forgotten colonies will survive to rebuild. The navigator houses, those psychically gifted bloodlines that made warp travel possible, find themselves simultaneously more essential and less powerful than ever before. Without the Astronomicon, their abilities are all that stands between humanity and complete isolation. They name their price for service, and that price becomes exorbitant. Navigator houses become de facto governments, their genetic monopoly on warp navigation giving them leverage over any political entity that wishes to maintain contact with neighboring systems. Some houses abuse this power shamelessly, extracting tribute and concessions from desperate planetary governors. Others take their responsibilities seriously, understanding that they are one of the few institutions capable of maintaining even minimal cohesion across the human territories. The navigator houses begin marrying into planetary nobility, creating hybrid dynasties that combine political power with psychic capability. Within a few centuries, the distinction between navigator and ruler becomes meaningless on many worlds. The assassin temples, those specialized killers trained to eliminate threats to the Imperium, find their purpose challenged but not eliminated by the new order. The Officio Assassinorum officially disbands after 5 centuries, its central authority on Terra unable to coordinate or support its far-flung operatives. The individual temples survive, each pursuing its own agenda. The Culexus Temple becomes a mercenary organization, its pariah assassins selling their services to the highest bidder. The Vindicare Temple fragments into competing schools of marksmanship, each claiming to preserve the true techniques. The Eversor Temple devolves into little more than a drug manufacturing operation, producing the combat stimulants that once turned men into killing machines and selling them to anyone with currency. The Kalidus Temple simply vanishes, its shape-shifting infiltrators presumably still operating but no longer reporting to any central authority. And the Vanus Temple, always the most subtle and least understood, disappears into the shadows of human civilization, manipulating information and events according to logic known only to its members. A psyker born in this age faces a vastly different fate than one born under the Imperium. Without the black ships to collect them, without the soul binding to make them useful while protecting their minds from demonic predation, most psykers either learn to control their abilities independently or die, often taking everyone around them when they perish. Some worlds develop their own traditions for managing psychic individuals, creating local orders of sanctioned psykers who serve their communities as healers, advisors, or warriors. Other worlds simply kill any child who manifests psychic ability, reasoning that the risk outweighs any potential benefit. The result is a massive reduction in humanity's psychic population, but also a corresponding reduction in demonic possession rates. The psykers who do survive and learn control tend to be stronger, more disciplined, more capable than their imperial counterparts would have been. Natural selection is a brutal teacher, but an effective one. 7 centuries after the emperor's absence, a warlord named Macarius emerges from the chaos and begins the last great crusade the human race will see for millennia. He unites 36 systems under his banner through a combination of military genius and charismatic leadership that recalls the emperor himself. For 40 years, Macarius conquers, bringing order and unity to a region of space that has known nothing but anarchy and warfare. His armies consist of human soldiers, augmented by a handful of space Sol, marine chapters who remember the old ideals and see in Macarius a chance to reclaim lost glory. He pushes deeper into unknown regions than any commander since the Great Crusade itself, his fleets discovering human colonies that have been isolated for so long they have forgotten they are part of a larger civilization. Macarius welcomes them all, incorporating diverse cultures and technologies into his growing empire. But Macarius is human, and humans die. When he finally succumbs to age and accumulated injuries, his empire fractures within a decade. His generals turn on each other in a scramble for succession that destroys much of what he built. The crusade ends not with glorious victory, but with the familiar pattern of fragmentation and civil war. The lesson is clear. Individual greatness cannot substitute for institutional stability. and humanity in this age lacks the institutions necessary to maintain anything larger than regional powers. Macarius becomes another legend, another story about what might have been, if only, if only, if only. The Tyranids arrive from beyond the galactic rim, with a hunger that does not discriminate between unified civilizations and fractured ones. The first human contact with the Great Devourer is a colony world that simply goes silent, its astropathic choir cutting off mid-transmission. When a scout fleet investigates months later, they find a world stripped to bedrock, its atmosphere thin and toxic, its oceans drained. The only evidence that humans ever lived there is scattered ruins half buried in ash. The scout fleet attempts to flee and is hunted down by bioships that move with terrifying coordination and purpose. One vessel escapes to bring warning to neighboring systems, but the warning is inadequate. How do you describe an enemy that is also an ecosystem, that is simultaneously individual organisms and a singular intelligence, that adapts faster than you can develop counter-tactics? The Tyranid hive fleets hit the eastern fringe first, consuming Tau and human worlds with equal veracity. The Tau response is coordinated and effective. They fall back, establish kill zones, use their superior technology to bleed the Tyranids at every engagement. The human response is fragmented and desperate, each system fighting alone because they lack the communications infrastructure to coordinate on a meaningful scale. Some worlds are devoured entirely. Others manage to survive the initial assault through luck or exceptional leadership, or simply because the Tyranids find richer feeding grounds elsewhere. The Great Devourer becomes a new constant in this galaxy of horrors, an enemy that cannot be reasoned with or corrupted or turned aside through any means short of absolute destruction. On some worlds, survivors of Tyranid attacks develop folk religions around the concept of the hive mind, worshipping the galaxy-spanning Gestalt intelligence as a dark god more comprehensible than the chaos entities that whisper from the warp. They create ritualistic practices meant to appease or communicate with the hive mind, leaving out offerings of biomass or conducting sacrificial ceremonies designed to attract Tyranid vanguard organisms. It never works. The Tyranids do not negotiate, do not accept worship, simply consume, but the attempt demonstrates humanity's desperate need to find meaning in a universe that offers none. If the Emperor will not protect, perhaps the Great Devourer will accept devotion. It is madness, but it is human madness, and that familiarity provides comfort even in the face of annihilation. The Black Crusades, those massive chaos incursions launched from the Eye of Terror, still occur but lack the coordination they displayed in the Imperial timeline. Abaddon, the Despoiler, the War Master's favored son, emerges from the Eye with armies of Chaos Space Marines and demon engines, but without a unified Imperium to target, his crusades dissipate into scattered raids and opportunistic conquests. He takes systems, rules them for a few decades through terror and dark worship, then abandons them when the forces of chaos inevitably turn on each other. Abaddon becomes a legend of horror, but not the existential threat he would have been to a centralized Imperium. His ultimate goal, whatever that might be in this timeline where Cadia is merely one fortress world among many, rather than the linchpin of the Cadian Gate, remains unclear even to him. He is a warrior in search of a war worthy of his hatred, and the fragmented human territories provide only small, unsatisfying conflicts. On worlds near the Eye of Terror, the line between chaos worship and survival becomes dangerously blurred. When a chaos warband offers protection in exchange for tribute, when refusing means watching your children dragged away by demons, the moral calculus becomes complex. Some worlds accept the devil's bargain, reasoning that chaos at least offers terms while extinction offers nothing. They maintain the outward appearance of chaos worship while secretly preserving their human culture and values, walking a tightrope between damnation and destruction. Others resist to the last, choosing martyrdom over corruption, their populations dying with weapons in hand and prayers to a dead god on their lips. Neither choice is wrong, both are tragedies. The webway, that ancient Eldar network of tunnels through reality, remains as broken as it was during the Siege of Terra. The Emperor's great project to connect humanity to that network died with his absence, and the massive breach beneath the Imperial Palace was sealed not properly, but desperately, a patch job that holds through constant vigilance rather than elegant engineering. The custodians know that one day the seal will fail, that the demons lurking on the other side of that barrier will eventually gnaw through, and when that happens, Terra itself will fall. They maintain their watch because there is nothing else to do, because the alternative is abandoning the cradle of humanity to demonic invasion. Some of them pray that the end will come quickly, that they will be granted the mercy of dying in battle rather than watching slow entropy consume the world they were created to protect. In the galactic south, a phenomenon begins that will eventually be recognized as the Hadex anomaly, a massive warp rift that splits real space like an infected wound. It spreads over centuries, consuming system after system, turning the southern reaches into a nightmarish realm where the laws of physics become suggestions and demons walk openly under alien suns. The human worlds in that region face a choice: flee northward into regions already overpopulated and resource depleted, or stand and fight against an enemy that cannot be defeated by conventional means. Many choose to fight because fleeing means admitting that nowhere in the galaxy is safe, and that admission breaks something essential in the human psyche. They develop weapons and tactics designed specifically for combating demonic incursions, becoming specialists in a form of warfare that would have been heretical under the Imperium. They burn their own worlds rather than let them fall to chaos, scorched earth tactics applied on a stellar scale. The Adeptus Mechanicus, or rather the dozens of competing factions that claim that title, make a discovery on a forgotten Forge world in the Ghoul Stars region. They find an intact standard template construct database, a complete repository of humanity's technological knowledge from the dark age of technology. It should be a salvation, the key to reversing millennia of technological regression. Instead, it becomes another source of conflict. The various Mechanicus factions cannot agree on how to interpret or implement the STC designs. Some see them as sacred texts to be followed exactly. Others view them as starting points for innovation. The debates become violent, then turn into outright war, and the Forge world where the STC was discovered burns in the crossfire. The database is destroyed, its knowledge scattered across 100 different factions who each possess fragments of the whole, but lack the cooperation necessary to reassemble it. Humanity's potential salvation becomes another casualty of its inability to unite. 1,000 years after the Emperor's absence, the galaxy has reached a new equilibrium. It is not a good equilibrium, not anything approaching the imperial vision of unified human space, but it is stable after a fashion. The human territories exist as thousands of independent or semi-independent states, each adapting to local conditions and threats. Some prosper, many barely survive. All live under the shadow of extinction, knowing that the next Orc-Wa or Chaos incursion or Tyranid splinter fleet could be the one that finally exterminates their world. They persist because that is what humanity does. Persist in the face of impossible odds. Survive when survival seems impossible. Endure when endurance looks like madness. The Space Marine chapters, those scatter inheritors of the Legionnaires Astartes, have become the closest thing to heroes this dark age can produce. They are not unified, not coordinated, often working at cross purposes or even fighting each other over ideological differences or resource disputes. But individually, each chapter represents a concentration of military power and capability unmatched by anything else in the galaxy. When an Orc-Wog threatens a human system, when Tyranid organisms make planetfall, when Chaos cultists attempt to open a warp rift, it is often a Space Marine chapter that makes the difference between survival and extinction. They remember, even if imperfectly, what the Great Crusade was meant to achieve. They carry that memory forward, one battle at a time, one world saved at a time, knowing that it will never be enough but unable to stop trying. The common human, the unaugmented civilian living on any of 10,000 worlds, experiences this age as one of uncertainty and terror, punctuated by moments of desperate hope. They do not understand the grand strategic picture. They cannot comprehend the cosmic forces that shape their reality. They know only that life is hard, that safety is temporary, that the monsters in the darkness are real and hungry. They develop cultures and traditions meant to ward off evil and attract good fortune, mixing half-remembered imperial doctrine with local superstitions and practical wisdom earned through hard experience. They tell stories about the Emperor, about the Primarchs, about the time when humanity ruled the stars, but these stories are legends now, comforting lies told to children to help them sleep through the night. The adults know better. The adults know that no one is coming to save them, that they must save themselves or perish in the attempt. Religion in this fragmented age becomes intensely local and diverse. Some worlds maintain worship of the Emperor, praying to a deity they believe watches over them even in death. Others develop pantheons incorporating primarchs or legendary heroes as secondary deities. Still others abandon human-centric religion entirely, adopting or adapting Zeno's belief systems or creating entirely new theological frameworks to explain their suffering. The one constant is that almost all human religious practice in this age is fundamentally pessimistic. The universe is hostile. The gods, if they exist, are either indifferent or malevolent. Salvation is not a promise, but a possibility, contingent on constant vigilance and sacrifice. Hope exists, but it is grim hope, hope laced with the understanding that things could always be worse. On ancient Mars, the last true fabricator general dies in his sleep at the age of 417, his body more machine than flesh, his mind partitioned across 17 different cognitive engines. He leaves no designated successor, and his death triggers another civil war that lasts 3 decades and costs Mars a third of its remaining industrial capacity. When the war ends through mutual exhaustion rather than victory, Mars is no longer the undisputed center of technological knowledge in human space. It is simply one forge world among many, distinguished by its history, but not by its current capabilities. The survivors begin the slow process of rebuilding, knowing that they will never reclaim the position Mars held during the Great Crusade, accepting diminished status because the alternative is extinction. The navigator houses, having accumulated centuries of power and influence, begin to fragment along ideological lines. Some houses maintain the old ways, carefully managing their bloodlines to preserve psychic purity and navigational capability. Others experiment with genetic modification and selective breeding programs designed to enhance their abilities beyond natural development. The experiments produce results ranging from miraculous to horrifying, creating navigator variants with capabilities far exceeding their ancestors, but also instabilities and mutations that threaten the bloodline's long-term viability. The houses engage in secret wars, fought through assassination and sabotage, each trying to eliminate competitors and monopolize the most profitable trade routes. It is capitalism applied to psychic ability, and the results are as brutal as market forces always are when divorced from ethical constraints. In the Segmentum Pacificus, a coalition of planetary governors attempts to recreate the Imperium in miniature, establishing a federation of worlds bound by mutual defense treaties and trade agreements. They call it the Pax Humana, and for 2 centuries it functions as intended, providing stability and prosperity to its member worlds. Then a chaos incursion hits the Federation's capital world, and the carefully constructed political structure collapses as each member world prioritizes its own defense over collective security. The Pax Humana fragments within a year, its member worlds retreating into isolation, The grand experiment in voluntary cooperation revealed is fatally dependent on conditions remaining favorable. The lesson is absorbed by political philosophers across human space. Unity through choice is fragile, and humanity in this age cannot afford fragility. The Inquisition never forms, because the institutional framework necessary for its creation does not exist. There are individuals and small organizations dedicated to hunting heretics, demons, and Xenos threats, but they lack central coordination or unified doctrine. Some are rigorous and ethical, carefully investigating accusations before taking action. Others are paranoid zealots who see heresy in every shadow and respond with summary execution. The absence of institutional oversight means both the best and worst impulses of these demon hunters go unchecked. Worlds are saved by vigilant investigators who root out chaos cults before they can complete their summoning rituals. Other worlds burn because paranoid madmen decided their entire population was tainted and needed purging. There is no Inquisition to impose standards, or share intelligence, or coordinate responses to systemic threats. There are only individuals doing what they believe is right, and their beliefs are as varied as humanity itself. 1,500 years after the Emperor's absence, a new generation of humans emerges that has never known the Imperium even as legend. To them, the fragmented galaxy is simply reality, the normal state of affairs. They do not mourn the loss of something they never had. They build their civilizations according to the materials at hand, adapting to Xeno's neighbors and warp storms and all the other horrors of the galaxy with the pragmatism of people who have no alternative. Some of these new civilizations are authoritarian nightmares that would horrify the Emperor's vision of human dignity. Others are surprisingly egalitarian and democratic, having learned from the Imperium's mistakes about the dangers of concentrated power. All of them are human, expressing the species' incredible adaptability and diversity. The Imperium tried to impose uniformity on human civilization. Its absence allows for experiment and variation, and while many experiments fail catastrophically, some succeed in ways the Emperor never imagined. The Astronomicon remains dark, that psychic lighthouse that once guided humanity through the warp, nothing more than a dead device maintained by custodians who understand its significance but lack the power to activate it. Pilgrims still visit the Astronomicon chamber, standing in silence before the massive mechanism, but they come to mourn rather than to pray. The light is gone and will never return, because the fuel that powered it, the Emperor's psychic might channeled through the sacrifice of thousands of psychers daily, is no longer available. The device stands as a monument to ambition and failure, a reminder that even the greatest works are contingent on their creator's survival. In the darkest corners of human space, in regions where the warp's tides run strong and reality's grip is weak, new forms of human culture emerge that would be unrecognizable to the Imperium. Populations adapt to constant demonic presence by incorporating chaos worship into their daily lives, not as corruption, but as appeasement, treating demons like dangerous natural phenomena to be managed rather than enemies to be destroyed. They develop Baroque social rituals designed to channel violent impulses toward acceptable targets, maintaining civilization by providing structured outlets for chaos influence. It is a tightrope walk between damnation and survival, and most eventually fall, but some succeed for generations or even centuries, proving that humanity can adapt to almost anything if survival demands it. The Emperor's dream of secular enlightenment, of a galaxy unified under rationalist philosophy and scientific progress, dies not with his absence but with the reality humanity faces in his wake. The universe is not rational. It is a hostile nightmare where physics bends to malevolent will, where gods exist and feed on suffering, where extinction is always one bad decision away. Secular materialism cannot provide comfort in such an existence. Humanity turns to religion not because they are weak or ignorant, but because religious frameworks provide meaning in a meaningless universe, structure in chaos, hope in despair. The Emperor would have despised this development, would have seen it as regression and failure. But the Emperor is gone, and humanity must find its own way forward, using whatever tools work regardless of their philosophical implications. 2,000 years after the absence, the last confirmed custodian dies defending Terra from a Black Legion raid. He fights alone, his golden armor tarnished and scarred, standing in the throne room before the empty seat of power. He kills 300 Chaos Space Marines before a Black Legion sorcerer brings him down with corrosive warp fire that eats through even custodian-grade ceramite. The throne room falls. Terra is occupied for 6 months before a coalition fleet drives the Chaos forces back into the warp. When Imperial Army regulars, not the old Astra Militarum but their successor organization, finally secure the palace, they find the last custodian's body lying before the golden throne, one hand outstretched toward the empty seat, as if reaching for something forever beyond grasp. They bury him with honor, then seal the throne room permanently. There is nothing left there worth protecting, they reason, just empty chairs and dead dreams. The Primarchs, those that survive, become increasingly mythological. Sightings are reported from across the galaxy, Russ hunting demons in the Eye of Terror, Gilliman leading fleets in the Eastern Fringe, the Khan's White Riders appearing during desperate battles, then vanishing before thanks can be offered. Most reports are probably false, wish fulfillment projected onto imposters or hallucinations, but some might be genuine. The Primarchs were gene-wrought demigods, designed to be immortal champions of humanity. Perhaps they endure still, fighting their private wars in the galaxy's shadows, mourning a father who abandoned them and an empire that never was. If they coordinate or even know of each other's continued existence is unknown. They are singular entities, each pursuing their own interpretation of the mission their father gave them during the Great Crusade. Some have remained true to that mission, others have adapted it to new realities. A few have probably gone mad, their stable minds eroded by millennia of grief and combat and impossible responsibility. 3,000 years after the Emperor's absence, human civilization has paradoxically achieved a kind of success. Not the triumph envisioned by the Great Crusade, not the million-world imperium united under absolute authority, but survival, messy, fragmented, barely adequate survival. Humanity controls perhaps 200,000 worlds across the galaxy, less than a fifth of what the Imperium held at its height, but those worlds are self-sustaining and relatively stable within their regional contexts. The species has adapted to the darkness, learned to navigate it if not master it. They have developed 100,000 different answers to the question of how to remain human when the universe wants you extinct, and while most of those answers are imperfect and many are horrifying, they work well enough to perpetuate the species. The question that haunts philosophers and theologians in this age is whether humanity is better or worse off without the Emperor's vision. The Imperium would have been authoritarian, oppressive, and cruel. The Emperor himself admitted this, viewing tyranny as unfortunate but necessary for species survival. This fragmented galaxy is violent, dangerous, and unstable, but it is also diverse, adaptive, and in some ways freer than the Imperium ever would have been. Entire civilizations develop according to their own values and priorities, unbound by the imperial truth or administratum diktat. Innovation occurs in 1,000 different contexts, producing technological and cultural developments that would have been impossible under enforced uniformity. The cost is measured in worlds lost, populations exterminated, knowledge destroyed by lack of coordination and communication. Whether that cost is worth the benefit of freedom and diversity is a question with no objective answer. People believe what they must believe to endure their particular corner of hell. The galaxy continues turning, stars being born and dying in cycles indifferent to the brief flickering of conscious life. Humanity is one species among thousands, no longer special, no longer protected by the might of the Emperor's vision. They are prey and predator simultaneously, fighting for survival like every other form of life in a universe that does not care whether they live or die. Some find that realization liberating, most find it terrifying. All must live with it, because the alternative is surrender, and humanity, for all its flaws, all its failures, all its mistakes, has never been good at surrender. They persist because persistence is what they do, endure because endurance is hardwired into their genetic code alongside aggression and curiosity and all the other traits that make them simultaneously magnificent and monstrous. The Emperor's absence created a vacuum, and what filled that vacuum was not order, but diversity, not unity, but adaptation, not peace, but 1,000 different wars fought according to 1,000 different philosophies. The Imperium would have imposed uniformity through force, creating a human civilization shaped by a single vision. The galaxy, without the Emperor, creates human civilizations shaped by local conditions and individual choices. Both approaches have merit. Both have catastrophic flaws. The difference is that the Imperium's approach concentrated all risk in a single point of failure, while this fragmented reality distributes risk across uncountable nodes. If a sector falls to Tyranids, the species survives elsewhere. If a region succumbs to chaos, humanity endures on other worlds. It is resilience through diversification, survival through lack of central coordination. It is the opposite of everything the Emperor intended, and it works. But it works at a cost that would have broken the Emperor's heart if he had possessed such an organ. Untold trillions suffer in this dark age, their lives brutal and short, their deaths meaningless except to themselves and those who love them. Worlds burn, civilizations collapse, knowledge is lost faster than it can be accumulated. The human species survives, yes, but the quality of that survival would horrify anyone who remembers the glory days of the Great Crusade. The Emperor sought to save humanity from this exact fate, and his failure to do so means countless generations living and dying in circumstances he would have considered intolerable. The tragedy is not just his absence, but the suffering that absence enables, the slow grinding horror of a galaxy without hope of salvation. In some regions, storytellers and historians maintain records of what was lost when the Emperor failed to reach the Golden Throne. They compile accounts of the Imperium that never was, imagining what human civilization might have become under his guidance. These speculative histories are works of fiction as much as scholarship, extrapolating from fragmentary records and wishful thinking. They describe a galaxy where humanity stands united against Xenos threats, where technology advances rather than regresses, where the imperial truth brings enlightenment rather than oppression. These stories are lies, of course, or at best optimistic speculation about a timeline that never existed, but they serve a purpose, providing a counter-narrative to the darkness, reminding people that their current suffering was not inevitable, that different choices might have led to different outcomes. Whether this provides comfort or makes the pain worse depends on the individual. The warp continues its slow encroachment on real space, the boundary between dimensions growing thinner with each passing century. Without the Astronomicon to provide a stable psychic reference point, without the Emperor's will pressing back against chaos's expansion, the immaterium bleeds into the materium in ways both subtle and catastrophic. Warp storms become more common, lasting longer and covering more area. Demonic incursions increase in frequency and intensity. Reality itself becomes questionable in regions where the warp's influence runs strong. Humanity adapts because adaptation is the only alternative to extinction, developing new technologies and techniques for combating or avoiding warp phenomena. They become experts in a form of defensive metaphysics, building societies designed to minimize chaos corruption while maximizing material survival. It is not enough, it is never enough, but it is what they have, and they use it as best they can. 10,000 years after the Emperor's absence, The galaxy that exists is unrecognizable compared to the Imperium's canonical timeline. There is no ecclesiarchy preaching the divinity of the God Emperor. There is no administratum maintaining bureaucratic control over 1,000,000 worlds. There is no inquisition hunting heretics with absolute authority. There is no unified Imperium at all, just scattered human civilizations doing their best to survive in a universe that wants them dead. The Space Marine chapters still exist, still fight for humanity, but they are relics of a forgotten age, knights errant wandering a galaxy that has moved past the ideals they represent. The Mechanicum has fragmented into competing cults, each pursuing technological knowledge according to its own interpretation of sacred machine wisdom. The Navigator houses have become nobility in all but name, ruling systems through their monopoly on warp travel. Terra remains humanity's spiritual center, but not its political capital, a pilgrimage site rather than a seat of power. And somewhere in the deep dark between stars, in regions where maps fail and navigation becomes guesswork, there are stories that the Emperor did not die, that he transcended physical form entirely, becoming something beyond human comprehension, a psychic entity existing in dimensions mortals cannot perceive. These stories say he watches still, that his consciousness swims through the warp like a whale through deep ocean, incomprehensible and vast. They claim his absence from the Golden Throne was not failure, but transformation, the necessary sacrifice of physical existence to achieve something greater. These stories are probably false, wishful thinking projected onto random psychic phenomena, but they persist because humanity needs them, needs to believe that their suffering has meaning, that their Creator has not abandoned them entirely even if he can no longer intervene directly in their affairs. The truth is simpler and more terrible. The Emperor is gone. He failed to reach the Golden Throne, and in that failure, he condemned humanity to 10,000 years of fragmented survival instead of unified purpose. There is no grand plan, no secret salvation waiting in the wings. There is only what humanity makes of itself in his absence, the civilizations they build and the values they choose to uphold in a universe without inherent meaning or justice. Some find nobility in that struggle, seeing in humanity's persistence proof of the species' fundamental worthiness. Others see only futility, endless suffering in service of simple survival. Both perspectives contain truth. Neither is complete. The long night continues and will continue as long as humanity endures. There is no dawn coming, no return to glory, no redemption waiting at the end of history. There is only the eternal present, each generation facing its own battles and making its own choices about what kind of humans they wish to be. The Emperor would have provided answers, imposed order, created structure to channel humanity's potential toward his vision of their ultimate destiny. In his absence, humans must answer their own questions, create their own order, determine their own destiny. It is a heavier burden than most can bear, but they bear it anyway, because the alternative is surrender, and humanity, battered, broken, barely surviving, does not surrender. They endure, and in that endurance, they prove that even without the Emperor's guidance, even without hope of final victory, the human spirit persists against impossible odds. It is not triumph, it is not even dignity, it is simply continuation, the base instinct to survive another day, to persist one more hour, to endure just a little longer in the face of infinite darkness. And perhaps, in a galaxy as cruel as this one, that is the only victory that matters.